Hi, everyone. I'm Tom Perriello. I'm the Executive Director of Open Society US, and we are ecstatic to have this discussion today, not only among these incredible panelists, but many who are joining and bring great expertise to the table as well. Um, if folks can mute, that would be great, including you for a moment, Ken, if you could. Um, we are at a moment in this country where we face a number of defining aspects, and we've talked really for a few years about this either being a moment of breakdown or breakthrough. That the very same forces that are giving us so much hope and unprecedented seriousness about justice, about inclusion, about racial equality, about fixing the promises of democracy that have never really been true here in this country are also the same forces that have triggered a violent, repressive, and racist reaction at all levels of our society, with horror stories we continue to see every day, whether it's the treatment of people in ICE facilities, whether it's parts of our country literally on fire from our failure to address climate change. The last one on climate change has actually cost us one of our panelists, but just for the day, Jim Tankersley was called away to cover the Oregon wildfires and has not been able to join us. But his work and reporting on workers continues to be an incredibly valuable contribution. So he wanted to pass along his regrets for not making it. We at Open Society are deeply committed to the full range of democracy, justice, and inclusion issues. And we have long been a leading funder on racial justice and on democracy and human rights. But the extent to which we have been all in on worker justice has been a little bit more of an on again, off again proposition. And I think our recommitment through this panel and recent giving has really been the result of the leadership of the people on this call and people who have shown great courage in organizing and using this moment both before COVID, but also during COVID, to really redefine the landscape of worker organizing and worker justice and give us both a reason to believe in terms of the moral urgency of the problem, but also a reason to believe in terms of showing how we can bring together workers, even against some of the biggest corporations, even against some of the biggest issues of structural racism that we face, and win. And this is a panel of dreamers. It's a panel of winners. It's people who have actually dared to change our sense of what is possible. And so I'm really excited to moderate the panel. We've agreed we're going to go light on bios, because if you don't know how amazing these folks are, you probably wouldn't be on this call right now. So I'm going to introduce them as I ask each of their first questions, but we really are excited to make this a working session, both to highlight some recent initiatives that have launched, some that you've probably heard about and some which are rolling out here, and also see all the work that lies ahead on this decision of whether this will be a breakdown or a breakthrough for basic issues of worker justice, of racial inclusion and empowerment here across the US, and really with ripple effects around the world. So I'm going to start with Aijen Poo, who is the co-founder and director of the National Domestic Workers Association. She's been a tremendous sounding board for so many people across the movement, and very thoughtful leader in how we think about both supporting traditional labor, but also organizing in new spaces, and ask, are we meeting this moment? What are the things that make you believe that we are meeting this moment, both in terms of opportunity and moral urgency, and we falling short? And we'll start with you.
Thanks so much, Tom. And it's such an honor to be on this panel with some of my most favorite leaders in the movement and some of the most effective organizers in the country. And what an important conversation to be having in this moment, as workers have just been really devastated by the pandemic and the economic crisis that we find ourselves in. And I will say that despite the record numbers of unemployed people, the brutality of the ways in which essential workers are having to navigate work without safety and health protections, and just the lack of real economic support for so many working people in this moment, I feel really hopeful because we are having an awakening in this country about just how much work that was previously invisible to most people, especially low-wage service work, right? How much of that work is actually essential to our safety, to our health, to our well-being, and ultimately to our ability to thrive as a country. And for those of us who've been organizing low-wage workers like domestic workers or Nady car wash workers or Smiley in so many different sectors, we know that the struggles of low-wage workers have been enormous and mounting over decades. And most low-wage workers came into the pandemic without job security, without health care, without access to a safety net even, and certainly not adequate health and safety protections. 82% of domestic workers came into the pandemic without a single paid sick day. So they came into the crisis with a tremendous amount of insecurity, and now all of a sudden this visibility is allowing those workers to tell their story in a totally different way and to bring about majoritarian support for real transformative change. And that support is driving a new level of leadership and momentum on the part of elected officials from Congress to cities and states around the country. And that was really the inspiration for teaming up with a whole bunch of organizations, including Jobs with Justice and SEIU and many others, to launch our Essential Worker campaign, which is launching. You're hearing it first here. We're really excited about it. It's the opportunity to charge the power behind the awakening around essential work in this country and to really translate that awakening into lasting structural change that will protect the rights and dignity of workers across our economy. And it, started out with Elizabeth Warren and Congressman Ro Khanna championing an Essential Workers Bill of Rights in Congress. And now we're starting to see workers in essential sectors taking that momentum, organizing it, championing bills of rights around the country, but also using it to launch campaigns for standards boards, to bring essential workers to the table, to help negotiate new norms in this unprecedented time of crisis, and to really try to raise standards as we figure out the path to economic recovery. So all that to say is that I feel hopeful. I feel inspired by the incredible organizing that's happening among workers across essential sectors and the ways that we're working together to really amplify and realize the opportunity of this moment.
Thanks, Ai-jen. With that, we'll go over to Erica Smiley, who is the Executive Director of Jobs with Justice, among many, many roles played across the justice movement, and really would more pick up and say more about this new Essential Workers campaign, and then to put it in the context of the creative tension or just all-out unity between some of the traditional labor and some of the new forms of labor organizing, how we should understand that in general, and then how that's coming together specifically in this Essential Workers campaign.
Yeah, look, it is awesome to be here, Tom, and to come after my sister in struggle, Ai-jen Poo. There are a couple of things that I want to start with, and I feel like it's really important to ground this moment in the history of it. And I'll share two things that my family taught me. The first one is that my mom always reminds me that we've been through much worse. Our ancestors were able to organize and somehow survive chattel slavery and even thrive. And so we can get through this. This is an opportunity for us to show what we were built for, what our ancestors really counted on us to do. The second thing that I want to share, which is why I'm from a music family for those who know me, is that a lot of times this dichotomy, this divide between one group and another is really placed upon us. And one great example is between blues and bluegrass, right? So oftentimes in the southern region, black musicians, white musicians were playing in the same bands in lots of different ways, all the way throughout the 1800s, early 1900s. And then it was the industry that came in and said, okay, we're going to target this audience with bluegrass, and then we're going to target this audience with the blues and more quote unquote urban music, and separated it. I think the same type of separation has been placed upon us as a labor movement, as a workers movement. This idea really just relating back to what tax status one group has over the other. But at the end of the day, all of us are trying to fight for opportunity for workers and for everyday people to have a direct say, a direct democratic say in their workplaces, in their industries and sectors, in their democracy. At the end of the day, this is really just us attempting to democratize the economic sector. We like to say sometimes that a union contract is really just a policy for a workplace. And in the event of a contract, workers also get to not only be a part of legislating those standards, but also enforcing them and implementing them, and even adjusting them when things shift or when conditions change. And ultimately, when we look at the worker centers and other organizations that are popping up beginning to do just this, whether it's to negotiate or set standards for a given sector or labor market, or to win policy, or even to negotiate with other economic actors like corporate landlords or Wall Street. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is expand democracy. This idea that the overwhelming majority should be able to have a direct say in their conditions and in setting their standards. And not only just because that's morally right, but actually all of us are safer and better when it happens. A great study just came out from George Washington University, finally showing that the difference between nursing homes where staff had a say, had a union, had a democratic participation to prepare for any crisis before it came, have 30% less COVID deaths than nursing homes where workers didn't have that kind of access through any channel, through a union, through any kind of labor management channel. And all of us are suffering from that. We could see the same thing with my local union grocery stores, right? Where I went to a local shop, right? They had a system during the peak of our first phase of COVID. They were only letting a certain number of people in. They had PPE. We all felt safe in that grocery store. But down the street in Walmart, it was sheer chaos. And that wasn't good for the workers, and it wasn't good for our community. So at the end of the day, all of these organizations, no matter how they're defined legally or how they define themselves politically, are trying to expand worker voice and democracy in all things related to the economy. Democracy can't just be this idea that we vote one day a year on an election. It actually has to build out the majority's participation in setting standards and implementing them. And that's why we join the National Domestic Workers and many others, United for Respect, AFT, in this campaign to lift up the voices of essential workers, because when essential workers are at the table, they not only do they pass standards that are good for them, but they pass standards that keep our entire community safe.
Thank you for that and for your leadership. And I think one of the things that's so exciting to see, and we're seeing a similar effort on the Movement for Black Lives side, which is that things that used to be separate, right, like organizing in a workplace versus organizing a particular, say, Fight for 15 versus a policy or advocacy campaign versus a showing political muscle at the polls, or somewhat in different silos, even within the same institutions. And I think what you all have put together on the Essential Workers campaign really is amazing in showing that all of these are about power, and all of these are about building out voices in the same way we've seen it with, the Athena Coalition, right? That certain types of workers are set against other workers. Consumers are seen as separate from the workers, homeowners in the places where these businesses come in. I think what has been so exciting to see in the last couple of years is just shattering that approach and saying, hey, the only reason we're going to be strong enough to win these fights is together. And with that, I want to go to someone who's won some fights and lost some fights and has an amazing new project as well, which is Nadie Dominguez, who is currently the co-founder of Unemployed Workers United, has worked in the union space as well as in the electoral space, and would love just two things to start from you, Nadie. One is just some lessons you brought into this current moment that is both new in the sense of the pandemic, but also really just an exacerbation of what has been there before, as Smiley spoke to. So what lessons do you bring into it? And then really tell us about this new organization and project, and please brag about it, because it's awesome.
Well, first, I just want to say it's so exciting to be part of this panel. And I feel like a lot of what we're birthing right now actually comes from a lot of the iteration and past work and organizing of all of the people here. So this is just part of the evolution. And I deeply, I am grounding our work in that. And so just wanted to say first, thank you to everyone here that has actually made it where we can do this right now. And so with that, I think I want to start by sharing some of the lessons learned coming out of a presidential campaign. The good news is that there's a lot of people that are kind of waiting for us. There's a lot of people that want to be connected and want to find political home. And so that's the good news. The challenge, the fortunate challenge we share collectively is how do we meet them? And how do we get them into our political homes? How do we keep them in our political homes, but also support them to grow? Because ultimately we know that there's just never going to be enough lawyers or enough, quote unquote organizers, that people themselves actually know best what needs to happen to improve their own lives. And our job is to just create the path and the tools to do that. And so that's our biggest challenge in this moment. And in a moment where people are feeling so just disappointed and betrayed by our own government and the society and safety net, it's almost like not just getting them in the door, but it's reminding them that we do belong together, that our futures are connected, and that none of us are going to be safe until all of us are, right? And so I think that that's the biggest challenge we face. And some of the other lessons I think that I've been learning in the last year really are the big questions that all of us have been asking ourselves, which is then how do we do that to scale? How do we do that with hundreds, thousands, and then millions of people? And that's really I think the biggest contribution we're trying to make with Unemployed Workers United is bring a lot of the lessons that we learned. Our whole team actually is coming out of this last iteration of a big presidential campaign that was for progressive principles and values. And we're trying to bring what we learned there to create, like IGen and Smiley were saying, permanent infrastructure for our people, that it's about power, right? That doesn't have an expiration date or doesn't have a election day deadline, but that it's there for us to continue to grow it and use it for us, right? For what we want to see happen. And that's what we're trying to bring. That's what Unemployed Workers United is all about. And in that, I think part of the lesson is that digital organizing cannot replace direct face-to-face feeling each other's energy of organizing workers and people in our communities, but it is a crucial and key tool that we can use to get to the millions, to get to the scale. And this pandemic, I think, really showed us that in this moment of our time, we can't have robust organizing strategies without scalable digital tactics, right? And that we need the two things to work together to actually create the biggest universe of people, the biggest network of people that are with us and are going to fight alongside each other to win. And with Unemployed Workers United, we just launched Labor Day. We're a week in, there's so much going on. 5 organizations that are anchoring this project, and we were very thoughtful and mindful of how it's actually connected to the fight of essential workers. For us, these are not two separate fights, right? I think IGen was naming it perfectly. The reality is that domestic workers, day laborers, car wash workers, construction workers, I'm so happy to be here in this panel with President Rick Maiden from the Painters Union. I learned so much from being inside, in that union, that I know, one, at some point, all of these workers in these industries are unemployed at some point during the year, either by virtue of the job itself, like construction workers that are off season when it's really cold and they can't be out there, right? Or just by the nature of the actual work like the workplace itself, right? Like when you have, if you're a domestic worker, if you have a job every week or not, or every month, and some months yes and some months no. So ultimately, when we think of unemployed workers, for us, we understand that to be really workers that happen to have jobs or not. And in this moment, of course, a huge number of folks that lost their jobs during this pandemic, but we want to make sure that through our work, a worker that lost their job 2 months ago because of the pandemic that was making $100,000 a year, for example, sees more of a connection to an undocumented farm worker in California working as an essential worker without any safety net and in the middle of fires right now to feed all of us, instead of Jeff Bezos that has made more wealth during this time while millions of people are losing their jobs and thousands are dying. And that's our biggest mission, is to make sure that those connections are there and that we can create the biggest network of people to bring back power to all of working class people, no matter where they are.
Thank you, Nady. And I want to come back to these two initiatives in a second, but first we want to go to Ken Rigmaiden, President Rigmaiden, the General President of the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, who's been a leader in so many fronts and so many different movements right now, and I think was one of the first labor presidents, if not the first, to be down at Black Lives Matter Plaza, and would love for you to speak specifically to how about the interrelationship between traditional labor and the racial justice movement, including what's changed and how some of those change, how we build on some of the momentum there, given that it has not always been a smooth relationship in the past. And you know, you've been through a few arcs of this. We've heard reasons to be hopeful. Would love for you to say a little bit about why is this moment different than what we've seen before, or just the latest in a set of cycles? And so if you could talk a little bit about some of those intersections and your own experience with it, Ken, we would really appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that. And I actually feel very much honored to be on this panel. Nady, kudos. Smiley, kudos. Everybody else on the call, kudos. I so much appreciate this opportunity, because just like folks say that they learn, I learn too. Now, being a traditional, quote unquote, I'm going to use the word traditional building trades member, as Nady mentioned, the notion of us working, we do work ourselves out of jobs. And we understand that that's the nature of the business. However, the notion of being down at Black Lives Matter was really a watershed for me, as being the first person of color to be the leader of a union in the building trades. I've said a couple of times in the arc of my career that I certainly shouldn't have been the first one, and I certainly shouldn't be the last one. It's just based on your opportunities and the skills that you bring to the job. And everybody has that opportunity and that ability. And when I say everybody has that opportunity, they should have that opportunity. But to come to the plaza and be there, I told and counseled my membership that were there with me, was that, look, a lot of times we quote unquote building trades folk think we have to lead everything. Really, what we need to do is to show up and show out and support the people who are having the same challenges that I have, that we have as workers, and sometimes don't really pay that much attention to it. To be there, to me, was the least we could do. To be involved was a little bit better. To go ahead and participate highly is where we need to be. And as a building trades union, a lot of times we don't show up fully. We stand by and say, well, okay, everything's okay. I refer to, 60 years ago, when Martin Luther King was talking to the AFL-CIO, and then President George Meany. He just wanted to help. He was trying to make the connection between working people, organized labor, and Black Lives Matter, and was somewhat rejected. But somehow, the United Auto Workers came to the forefront. And to me, this situation that we've been going through right now, I believe is absolutely positive. As a kid growing up, I remember seeing people protesting in Watts, people protesting in Detroit, people protesting in Philadelphia, looking like me. What I saw on the plaza when I came out was I saw America. I saw people who looked just like the diversity on this call, just like the people who believe that there's something going on with this country. The tragedy, however, is the notion of people like me who look like me have to be murdered and then shown on TV or on any other program to get the picture, to get the message, to understand that, well, things aren't necessarily so right for a group of people who came to this country not on their own volition and had never received the right of anyone else who has come into this country. And yet, as Smiley said, still we rise, still we rose, still we want just the equal opportunity that any other citizen has. We're not quite there yet. But as a leader of the IUPAT, what I saw was people like Nady Dominguez, people like Smiley, people like you who said, hey, there is something wrong. We need to have partnerships. The one thing I've done with the IUPAT is to make sure that our members, our leaders understand that yes, it's great that you work in a building trade. It's great that you're able to make a living. It's great that you're able to get a pension. But what about the communities where you live? What about the communities where you work? We need to stand up and show up. That's what I've tried to do with the IUPAT. I'm so appreciative of folk like Nady Dominguez, folks like Tamara Brummer, folks like Rosa Lozano, who dared to join and take a stab at being a member of the IUPAT. I appreciate it. It showed something not only to me, but to the members that I represent, to the representatives that support those members, to my organizing team. We learned something. And as Nady said, Nady learned something also. So to me, it's all about all of us who have the same values, who talk about working families, who talk about having a good lifestyle, who talk about having opportunity, that if we pull together, like I feel we are in this moment, we're on the winning side. We're the group that can win. We can't do it alone. IUPAT sure as hell can't do it alone. But if we're working together and supporting each other together, we'll win.
Thank you so much, Ken. And I want to ask each of you about kind of your best case scenario and your worst case scenario a year from now, and what you think is the single biggest differential. But before I do that, in the spirit of labor, I want to give a special shout out to some people who helped put this together, including Lainey Romero Alston and Mary Beth Maxwell from our team, along with others, Tom Watson and others on the comms team, Eric Blank. A lot of people obviously go into putting something like this together. Lainey and MB in particular really have helped to push us to go much bolder in our support for worker justice and organizing as well. And so I just want to really appreciate their role in this, as well as, of course, the huge commitment of Patrick Gaspard, the president of our Global Foundation and a longtime union member, organizer with SEIU. So I think it's a good moment for that. So with that, I want to go back to each of you and say, a year from now, imagine yourself at next Labor Day. What is a realistic, not the dream, like what could we realistically imagine next year, and how bad could it get? And what do you think, and state at least one factor that you think will be a difference between those scenarios, and Ai-jen, perhaps why don't we start with you?
Tom likes to ask the easy questions. According
Another
to
second, since I put her on the spot, supposed to remind folks that you can submit questions via the Q&A button. So please feel free to submit questions by the Q&A button. With that, I go back to Ai-jen.
Well, according to Ken, we're going to win a year from now. So I think we'll start there. But, I think a good case scenario would be that we have really vibrant organizing among workers across all essential sectors, across all sectors of the economy, unemployed, employed, everyone standing together demanding dramatic, bold structural reforms in our economy and democratizing our economy to actually work for the workers who produce the wealth and power everything in our economy. And a rethinking of our safety net, where workers are actually at the table, imagining and designing a safety net that actually keeps working people safe in this country, and really active campaigns and initiatives at the state and local level as well. So it's not just about what's happening nationally, but I think at every level, especially in the communities where workers are living and organizing, for there to be vibrant campaigning happening and a movement that has the support of the public that's just been through unprecedented crisis and knows that it's time to team up and reset, that it's not about going back to any kind of normal before the pandemic, that we actually have to take this moment of disruption and turn it into real reform in the interests of working people in our country. And I'll just say one thing to build off of some of what Ken said, is that I don't think we can have economic dignity or democracy in this country without addressing anti-Black racism and structural racism throughout, up and down, throughout our economy and our democracy. And I think just being a part of the domestic worker movement, it is in our DNA. Some of the first domestic workers in the United States were enslaved Black women, and the racial exclusions of Black workers from the foundational labor laws in our country in the 1930s, including the right to organize and form a union, right? Specifically excluding farm workers and domestic workers because they were Black workers at the time. This is not, this is what has shaped millions of workers' realities for generations. And fortunately, Black women have also organized for generations to really try to change those conditions. And those are the shoulders that we stand on as the National Domestic Workers Alliance today. And the Black domestic workers within our movement just launched a Black domestic worker agenda called the Unbossed Agenda, which is really a vision for how to transform care and work for Black women in this country. And it is an organizing call to action as well. And I think, a year from now, I'm hoping that that vision is really shaping public policy and public conversation in a different way. And all of these things come together and help to make our movement much more holistic, much more powerful, and deliver the wins that we actually deserve.
Well, same question over to you, including if you want to talk about any sort of geographic or strategic focus within that, but really hopes and fears time.
Yeah. Look, I'm gonna build on a little bit of what Ai-jen said, but also try to reference some of the history again. That's just, try to look back in order to move forward. It's just how I move. But I do think that this is an inflection point for us. but it's not guaranteed. We're going to have to fight for this. And it's one of those moments where it's essentially, like, not to be cliche, the fight of our lifetime. The late John Lewis said when he was still a young leader of SNCC that it's really our duty to finish the cause and the tasks of the American Revolution, and that it's not simply about changing who is the elite 1% in charge, whether it's plantation owners or the corporate industrialists, but actually about expanding democracy and the majority of the population being able to engage. And so what I see ourselves in the next year, I really think it's important for us to see our task as that big. That our task, certainly the election is one step towards that, and thinking about the first 100 days and these policies, but that our task is bigger than that. Our task is actually to expand democracy in all aspects of our society, including in our economy. So I hope that a year from now, not only do we see that as our task, but we take the opportunity to say it was beneficial when workers in places like Los Angeles form worker-led health and safety boards in order to deal with the second wave of the COVID pandemic. Perhaps we could build similar structures long-term to prepare for future crises before they come, whether it's public health crises, climate crises, or economic, that it actually benefits us when workers are at the table. We see the difference between workers in nursing homes when they had a say, what that meant for the people who lived in those homes, the patients of those homes. Why don't we actually see worker organizing and workers having some platform to set those standards as something that would benefit that sector and benefit our seniors and our retirees longer term? And likewise, as we look at and begin to test similar experiments in other cities, in Ohio, in Florida, in Texas, to really see what are the infrastructure, what are the task force, instead of just passing legislation, what are the points of entry that workers actually get to be a part of implementation, whether it's through some form of co-enforcement or a task force or something where we are setting standards not on a one-time basis, but actually in a rolling basis where we're constantly checking in on them and adjusting based on new situations as they arise. So my hope is that in a year from now, we'll actually be thinking in that way, thinking about how we are continuing, how our generation is continuing this great democratic experiment, and how we're doing it not just in the political arena, but also economically.
Nady, you've seen this from every angle. From I think you started out organizing car wash workers and then co-founding of the Dreamers and Mijente, and then doing that organizing inside traditional unions. In the Bernie campaign as well. I referred earlier to Warren and Rose Bill. We have champions now in elected office we didn't have before, but they didn't necessarily win the top of the ticket either. As you look at this, do you feel like the arc's bending in the right direction, and where do you think we could be a year from now?
Yeah, I think my first hope in putting it out there to the universe is that we could be physically together in a year, number one, that we could feel safe. Everyone together could feel safe and ready to do that. Number two, I do think that the best kind of scenario that I can imagine is one where we have built our power to fight together. Because as many of the folks here have said, it won't matter who we have in the White House. For a lot of the fights that we've been in for many decades, we know that fight has to go on, and that we have work ahead of us. And so the exciting part, though, I want to envision a government and an administration that is willing to listen and actually deliver for the majority of us, not the 1% of us. And so I think when I think about a year from now and even our project, what I envision is being able to kind of support the work of everyone here. A lot of our work, we're thinking about it regionally, but we're also thinking about it sectorally. Construction, home care, we're thinking about service and what does it look like in retail? And we were very intentional when we were coming together of who were some of these anchor organizations, back to Aijen's point around, we have to name like racial economy, right? And like it is true, like it's not class and in capital and race, when they intersect, it hits all of us differently depending who we are and how we're showing up. And so having Mi Gente, having the National Black Worker Center Project, having United for Respect, having, you know, Working Families Party and People's Action as the anchor organizations. And really for us, our thought was it would demonstrate that we're anchoring this work on those real people on the ground that are really being impacted by this moment, and that we're not thinking about it just as organizing in the workplace, whether you have a job or not, that we're thinking about it about building power collectively, and that we can imagine political home for millions of people in different ways, shapes, and forms, right? It could be a worker center. It could be a political action group. It could be a community group. It could be a group that is based on identity politics, but understands the connection with the economy, that we just need to bring people together and grow in that way. And so my vision from a year from now is that what we build helps all of the organizations and unions here and in our network be much bigger than they are today and have way more muscle to deliver for our families.
So I want to remind folks they can hit the Q&A button. We have a couple questions coming in, one of which, Nadia, is to you about particular challenges in organizing the Latinx community, and particularly working class Latinx folks. I'm going to go to Ken to answer the hopes and fears question, and then we may come back to you. And two other questions for the panel to be thinking about: who would be a dream labor secretary? And what are the prospects of the immediate fight over the HEROES Act and the elements that some of you have worked so hard to be part of on that? So Ken, first to you on hopes and dreams, and then we'll do a circuit on those.
Okay, so for me, it's really, I focus on the organization that I represent, and it is about all of us working together. And I look at that as a victory. I really do, because working with my organization, the notion of being able to work with a program, with Jobs with Justice, with the car wash effort, with any effort realizing that we're all working families, we're all working people. We have a saying in our organization that the IUPAT fights for working people. Well, we have to live up to that. And if I can convince my entire leadership across North America to take that motto and to live to it, to be involved, to participate when nurses are striking, to participate if there's a car wash challenge going on, to participate on any kind of thing that supports working families, I just do believe that that makes us a little bit stronger. I don't know if it takes us all the way to where we need to be, but it puts us out on the right direction. And to be honest, I just believe that my union over the years didn't necessarily show up all the time. And for me, to make sure that we show up and participate for all the right things that benefit working families, including our families, then I look at that as a real opportunity and really something that can be real for my organization, just to be engaged and to be involved and support each other. That's what I see, and that's what I'm hoping for. When it comes to the comments about elections and nominations, of course, all of that stuff is local. Yeah, we're going to have a presidential election. But when I talk about infrastructure, the highways, the byways, the bridges, the water tanks, all of that stuff, that is local. And we still have to say that it's not just about the national election, it's about every election. Every election, we need to show up as working families and make sure that we move forward. So with that, I look at that as an opportunity, and I look at that in this space that we're in today, that we're getting in that direction. That not only will we show out on this election, but the upcoming elections into the future century. So that's where I'm at.
So Nadine, perhaps we'll go back to you and take the question from the audience about the specific challenges and opportunities of organizing in the Latinx space and experiences you've had with that. If you want to take on either of the others, you can, and otherwise we'll take those fun questions back to Ijin and Smiley.
I definitely want to hear everyone's answer on who would we imagine and ideally have as labor secretary, because that's super exciting. But on the Latinx question, yeah, I think the biggest challenge right now with my community is that we've been under attack under this administration since day one. And when President Trump says they are the rapists, the criminals, he's talking about Mexicans, and that equals therefore all Latino people, which obviously not all Latinos are Mexican. A lot of people were born here in the United States. But that's how it's come through, right, to our community. So our community is wounded, deeply wounded, and facing so many attacks. ICE has been completely rogue, and when I think of our community too, I think of immigrant and undocumented Latinx folks too. So the challenges are big, but our folks are also really resilient. So one of the ways that we're thinking through some of the challenges with both Latinx communities, but in general immigrant communities, is that whatever we build needs to be culturally competent, and it needs to be bilingual and multilingual. And we need to do that in a way that is not just about language, but it's actually about really putting forward content and information and spaces that feel good for people, that feel safe, and people are excited to be part of. And so I think that we do have a huge challenge, but I also know that we have to listen to the folks on the ground. And my mom is an organizer, and she, her main thing would be like, if you have the good space and safe space and you have food, which right now we couldn't do that, people will be there and they'll show up, because we've always been fighting, like Smiley said, right? Like we come from a long generation of warriors, strong warriors and fighters. And this is just one more generation of that. My pick for an ideal Secretary of Labor would be Secretary Julie Su from California. That's how I would definitely propose if we would have our ideal labor secretary in the United States.
I feel like we have 4 pretty good candidates on this panel, but with that, I will go over to Smiley next.
Yeah, look, I feel like I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued by Nadine's answer. I was also like, trigger alert, right? Because you mentioned what Trump was talking about in terms of immigrant communities and rapists and all this stuff. And meanwhile, we all hear the announcement about the forced hysterectomies in the Georgia Detention Center. We're in an appalling moment. So let me say this about the labor secretary. I'm not quite going to fall into the trap of naming someone, because I don't want to doom them, because I could put someone in all kinds of situations. But I will say there is a prototype, and it should be a person who has recently been a worker, potentially a wage worker, who comes from and has direct experience with what it means to be someone who is dependent on wages in this era, in this part of our history. Secondly, they should be able to represent the overwhelming majority of working people in this country, mostly women, right? And so that's a second hit. And then last, what I find most important is that they should see their role not simply as implementing every tedious detail of administrative rules and regulation that oftentimes tie our hands, but actually see themselves as frontline champions for defending democracy in the workplace. That's what we need. The Department of Labor and the Secretary of Labor need to see themselves as champions for democracy, particularly in this moment when we need to maximize participation. And so I really would want to see someone who, in addition to looking at some of the institutional leaders of our organizations, including us on this call, was also very much grounded in building relationships with those who are trying to organize, many for the first time, in whatever formations, be it a local union or some other group. So those are the qualifications that would make up a Secretary of Labor that I would be excited about, and ideally see them create space for many of us to brainstorm and dream and build new systems that better meet the needs of the modern worker.
I love that.
Secretary Fu, you next.
Actually, Nady took my pick. I was going to say Secretary Sue as well. She's a star and a champion of workers, and yeah, I kind of picture, I can see it now, going to visit her at Francis Perkins Center. So but I like Smiley's approach, which is to really talk about criteria. And I think we also, when it comes to cabinet positions, need to be talking about some litmus tests too. Like, we shouldn't have somebody as Secretary of DHS who participated in the separation of children from their parents at the border. And we shouldn't have a Secretary of Labor who comes out of a company in the private sector that's been abusive or exploitative to workers, or tried to undermine a union organizing effort. And ideally, we would have somebody who comes out of a workers' movement or in deep relationship to worker movements, to be able to actually bring that perspective to understanding what it will take to enforce our labor laws in this country, because that perspective has been too often missing, and especially as of late. So I like the idea of the criteria, and I think we got to have some bottom lines, and I think we've got some great talent in our ranks, really good people that we could draw from, like Julie.
And back to you, and one question was also specifically about the pending HEROES Act and the prospects of that. So if you want to answer any set of those, over to you. You're on mute, Ken.
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry about that. There you go. So on the Secretary of Labor, I think I'm going a little bit back to the politician side of things, political things. But this goes to a person, in my opinion, who listened to labor. I met her over 10 or 11, maybe 12 years ago. I was in Georgia for the Labor Council meeting, and she came there, and I was somewhat astounded by her comments as a person on the political process in Georgia. And I've been like a fan of her ever since. She certainly has talked to labor. She certainly is a very brilliant person, and that's what I was thinking about, just navigating through that mishigas of work that are stuff in the Department of Labor. Someone that had the ability to navigate through that and the ability to make some change happen. And the person that popped in my mind, just out of my head, was Stacey Abrams. I think she's a very smart person, very brilliant person. The way she communicates is outstanding, and I think a lot of times that ability to communicate across the board is vitally important to try to get something going on. But that's my guess, my wish, my kind of, yeah, this could work. So that's where I'm at.
This is a fun exercise, but you're all organizers at heart. So, sorry, Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask, was there another question you had on top of that?
Well, I think instead, because we're getting near the end, what I'll do is this. You're all organizers at heart, and so you know how to make an ask. So I want to have go around the horn with each of you and say, for people on this call, what should they be doing right now? Whether it's how to get involved with the Essential Workers campaign, how to help get the HEROES Act passed. If you could make one ask of all of us on the phone, you each get to close with one ask, and we'll go in reverse order of how we started. So Ken, we'll go to you on this for a closing word and a closing ask.
Okay. in order to move forward, the way I see it is to engage with the groups in your community. And when I say with the groups in your community, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's a Latinx group, whether it's any group, your local organization, the local union, the district council, your family, your friends. You probably know people that are in organized labor in some way, shape, or form, and you coordinate with them. I mean, because to me, the piece is we're working people. And working people, if we just sit and communicate with each other, we'll know we have more things in common than we do in differences. We're all trying to make it in this world and all trying to do it the right way. And we always run into roadblocks. And the ability to be able to have a conversation with someone and learn, that's the way I see things happening. Just being engaged in your community, whether it's a church, whether it's any group that you're with, have that conversation about what's it like on the job. Are you getting a good shake? Are you being run over? You'd be surprised how many people will say, well, could use some assistance. After all, if you talk about organized labor, apparently it's getting a little bit of a cachet now. That's a lot of people are starting to think that, well, maybe being in a union ain't such a bad thing after all. And we need to take advantage of that. So that's the way I see it, that we just try to make sure we're communicating with each other, not just complaining, but communicating to try to be successful.
Nady, over to you.
My ask would be for folks to visit uwunited.org, which is our new website for Unemployed Workers United, and get connected. One of the two major campaigns right now that we're going to be supporting is going to be Eviction Defense. We think that one of the biggest things we're about to see as part of the economic crisis we're living in, of people that have lost their jobs or have lost some sort of income, is going to be how are they going to keep their homes, whether they're homeowners or tenants. So come be part of that, and also defending the election. And so we're a proud partner and collaborator with the Frontline effort, and also supporting the Fight Back table. So I would say, there's a place for all of us in whatever role you want to play. And because it's digital and virtual, you can do it from anywhere you are.
I think that was 3 asks, which seems appropriate. With that, we'll go over to Smiley.
Yeah, I love this panel. I'm so grateful to be in relationship and in movement with all of you all. I think the first step is whatever is right in front of you. We want to win an Essential Workers Bill of Rights for everyone. So it's not enough for you to just say thank you, but actually to get involved depending on whatever is right in front of you. So if you are a teacher and you're in negotiations, try to negotiate for an Essential Workers Bill of Rights for you and the parents that come to your school. If you are a restaurant employee or a retail worker, try to engage your employers directly, as well as engage the local decision makers to navigate what would a worker-led health and safety platform look like, similar to what was one in Los Angeles. And if you are, frankly, anyone who purchases things from companies like Amazon, or who lives in a place that might be owned by a corporate landlord, to fight for rent forgiveness and to push them to be accountable, to make a shared sacrifice like the rest of us are doing. There's no reason, I think it was the number yesterday, Jeff Bezos could pay all of his workers over $100,000 and still make what he made before COVID. There's no reason that we all can't contribute to holding the wealthiest among us accountable and to make them experience the shared sacrifice that we're in. So the key point is let's fight for these standards, the standards present in the Essential Workers Bill of Rights. In every arena, whatever is closest to you, that's where you should be fighting for it.
Thanks. Aja?
I want to quickly shout out Monica Ramirez from Justice for Migrant Women, who right now is announcing at the City Club of Cleveland the launch of the Ohio Essential Workers Bill of Rights campaign. So shout out to her and Ohio for showing up and organizing, and I would say to vote early, vote and get everyone you know, make sure everybody's registered. They should check that out now. Get your mail-in ballot, get it all going as early as possible, or if you're going to go, you can also get resources at karenactionus.org if you have questions about how to vote safely. Vote, vote, vote.
Well, thank you. My only ask will be for everyone to thank this panel for their participation today and their brilliance, but also their great work. We do hope you will engage with these initiatives if you're an activist, as a volunteer, if you're a donor, as a funder, if you're a reporter, to write about these efforts, and as citizens and neighbors alike here, that we take this seriously, not just during this electoral season, but that this is a very, very long fight. And these are four of the people who are helping to make sure that workers are winning those fights more than in the past. So we're proud to stand with them. Again, want to thank Lainey and B and Jonathan, Amy, and others who've been part of organizing this on our end. And we will make the recording available and get out there, vote, organize, and activate. Thank you all so much for being part of this.